And I promised myself I wouldn't cry.
No,
But it's hard not to.
it's hard not to.
Now I know why you put the tissue
We'd
there.
already had a 6-hour monsoon, mudslides. Like, it was just, and I was like, we are in it. And then
Scarlett Johansson just exposed Hollywood's dirtiest little secret, but not in the way she thinks. As the spotlight starts to dim, she's rewriting the script. And suddenly, it's not about fame or fortune anymore. It's about the male gaze, objectification, and how the industry failed her. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. What if the male gaze didn't leave her? What if it just moved on? It's the kind of statement that instantly splits a room. Scarlett Johansson, once hailed as one of Hollywood's most desirable stars, now says she was a victim of the industry's obsession with the male gaze. In a recent interview with the Times of London, Johansson opened up about the roles that defined her early career.
Offered a lot of roles revolving around desirability and the male gaze as a young actress.
According to her, many of them were rooted in how desirable she appeared to men. Her character arcs, ambitions, even the way she was framed on screen, she claims it all revolved around pleasing a male audience. That's less frequent now, she said with a straight face. Something has shifted. She's not wrong, something has shifted, but maybe not how she thinks. Because when a statement like that comes from a fresh-faced up-and-comer, it reads as bold, maybe even admirable. But when it comes from a millionaire actress promoting a failing blockbuster, the timing raises eyebrows. And not the kind shaped by Hollywood makeup teams.
And you're on this dinosaur island in which you can pick up main quests and side quests throughout the island that's infested with dinosaurs. Actually, sounds...
Scarlett is currently 39. That's not old by any real-world standard, but in Hollywood, a town drunk on youth and Botox, it might as well be a death sentence. For actresses, the roles shrink as the years stack up. The offers slow down. And suddenly, the very system that once praised them becomes a punching bag for everything that's gone wrong. And now here she is, just months before that milestone birthday, talking about how she's moved on from roles that cater to the male gaze. But let's be real. Did Scarlett Johansson really move on from those roles, or did they move on from her? Because here's what people aren't saying out loud. She built her career on those parts.
As soon as they start to hit a certain age bracket, they want to pull that ladder up from behind them and talk about, well, we really shouldn't have those roles.
The tight leather suits, the sultry glances, the femme fatale energy, those weren't side notes. They were the brand. And they worked. They launched her into superstardom, helped her headline billion-dollar franchises, and landed her on magazine covers for nearly 2 decades. That's the part of the story that's hard to swallow for many. It's not just what she said, it's when she said it. Now, with fewer blockbuster offers and less A-list buzz, Scarlett's repositioning herself. She's no longer the bombshell, she's the misunderstood artist, the activist, the voice of the voiceless. But audiences aren't as easily fooled anymore.
Yeah, like you guys are making movies that nobody wants to see, saying that there's more opportunity, but nobody wants to go see them.
And online, the backlash came swiftly. Memes flooded in, hot takes went viral. Some people accused her of hypocrisy, others called it self-pity in disguise. One commenter summed it up bluntly. You cashed the checks. You played the game. And now you want us to believe you hated it all along? To some, it feels like the oldest trick in the Hollywood playbook. Retire the role before the role retires you. Frame your dissent as a decision. Make fading out look like standing up. And that's the real controversy, not just what Scarlett said, but what she didn't. Because if you listen closely, this wasn't about right or wrong. This was about relevance.
It's like, well, one, maybe it's because there's
older.
younger people that are getting offered those roles. And I just want to say for the record.
And as the curtain begins to lower on one era of her career, Johansson is trying to step behind a different kind of spotlight. One shaped by reflection, critique, and a desperate need to stay part of the conversation. But this isn't the first time she's rewritten the story. And if we rewind just a few years, we'll see exactly how the seeds of this narrative were already being planted. Rewind to 2022. Scarlett Johansson is still very much a household name, but something is shifting, quietly, strategically. She sits down for yet another interview, and the narrative she begins to spin isn't about box office numbers or
dollars by being exactly what Hollywood wanted you to be. You pose for magazine covers, you wear the costumes, you cash the checks.
upcoming projects. It's about something far more personal. How she was objectified by the very industry that made her a star. I kind of became objectified and pigeonholed in this way, she said, where I felt like I wasn't getting offers for things that I wanted to do. That's not just a critique of the roles she played, it's a critique of how she believes Hollywood and the audience saw her. She goes further, almost with a sense of wounded disbelief. I remember thinking to myself, I think people think I'm 40 years old. And for Scarlett, that realization wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. In a town where youth is currency and desirability is power,
And how she thought people saw her as some old fossil at the ripe old age of 40.
the idea that she was aging, even prematurely in people's minds, was threatening her very foundation. Not her talent, not her resume, her value. That line, it stopped being something that was desirable and something that I was fighting against, became a kind of confession. But was it sincere? Or was it a carefully placed breadcrumb in a larger strategy? Because here's what no one in the mainstream press dared to say. Scarlett Johansson didn't accidentally become a sex symbol. She was marketed as one, cast as one, styled as one, and ultimately embraced it. She wasn't dragged into the role of Hollywood's femme fatale. She leaned in, and why wouldn't she? It worked.
Since when did people start asking each other about in interviews about their underwear?
No, because it is such a skin tight. Here's
I'll
why.
leave it up to your
Loaded onto the scene in movies where her allure wasn't just a subplot. It was the plot. From Lost in Translation to Match Point to Iron Man 2, the camera never looked away. Directors didn't hide her curves, they highlighted them. Her voice, breathless and sultry, her wardrobe, painted on, her posture, carefully coached to flirt with the lens, and we bought it. Audiences loved it. Hollywood loved it. She became a multimillionaire playing roles that turned sexuality into power, and she wielded that power like a pro. So when she later claims she was pigeonholed, it sounds a lot like someone complaining about the cage after they've pocketed every golden egg inside.
Seconds. For 2 decades, Scarlett Johansson built her entire career on being the hot girl in movies. And you know what?
Because let's not pretend this was a short phase. Scarlett rode the male gaze to the top of the industry. It wasn't some dark secret, it was her brand. It launched billion-dollar franchises, landed her contracts with L'Oreal and Dolce and Gabbana, and earned her a spot among the world's highest-paid actresses. But then the cultural winds began to change. Me Too shook the foundations of the industry. Feminism became marketable. Studios started choosing diversity over sex appeal. And suddenly, that version of Scarlett Johansson didn't sell like it used to. So she pivoted, she became more vocal, more introspective. She took on artsy roles, gave more interviews about gender politics.
Scarlett Johansson talks being groomed in Hollywood for bombshell roles. And
spoke about being misunderstood, objectified, and reduced. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a case study in how Hollywood treats women. And make no mistake, she's not wrong that the industry has a long, ugly history of typecasting, especially when it comes to women. But what rubbed people the wrong way was how convenient her revelations seemed. Because it's easy to criticize the game after you've already won. It's like watching a champion athlete trash the sport that made them famous. After they've taken the trophy, the endorsements, and the 7-figure contract, you can't spend 20 years dancing in the spotlight and then complain that the light was too bright. And maybe that's why so many people didn't buy
The
it.
review from us, you don't get to do all of that, capitalize, make millions of dollars on it, and then complain about the culture. You can
Because it didn't feel like a reckoning. It felt like a rebranding. Suddenly, being seen as a sex symbol was a burden. Suddenly, those career-making roles were a trap. Suddenly, the thing that paid for mansions, fame, and red carpet glamour was the enemy. And yet, not once did she say no at the height of it. Not once did she refuse a role or push back publicly when it really would have cost her something. Instead, she's doing it now after the fact. When the roles have dried up, the spotlight is fading, and younger faces are taking her place. And that's the part no one wants to say out loud. The honesty doesn't feel honest anymore, not when it comes right after the party's over. It's not that what Scarlett's saying is wrong. It's that...
Well, here's the thing. The reason why it's less frequent is because you're a lot older. And yes, you were...
She waited until it was safe to say it, until it wouldn't cost her anything, until it might even benefit her again. Because let's be real, in 2022, vulnerability was trending. Saying you were objectified didn't just spark sympathy, it sparked clicks. It made headlines, it bought relevance, and in a media ecosystem that feeds on outrage and reinvention, that might have been the smartest role Scarlett ever played. And yet she's far from the only one pulling that move. Because, as we've seen again and again in Hollywood, the moment an actress starts aging out of the system, the story changes.
Don't you? So take it off, right? And it is very true. But a lot of these girls did it anyways because they could have said no.
And suddenly the very machine that elevated them becomes the villain in their next act. Scarlett's confessions might have earned applause in a controlled press room, but out in the wild, the reaction was anything but warm. Social media lit up, not with sympathy, but with side eyes. For every fan praising her vulnerability, there were 10 others rolling their eyes so hard they could see into next week. It didn't take long before the backlash had a life of its own. Threads, think pieces, reaction videos, all dissecting the same bitter question. Why is Scarlett Johansson complaining now? One user nailed the mood with brutal clarity. You made millions playing the bombshell. You were the male gaze, and now you want to cancel it? Another put it even more bluntly. Don't hate the game after it stops playing in your favor.
Actresses start getting the roles you used to get. You suddenly discover that everything you did to get famous was problematic.
And that's really the core of the resentment. It's not just that Scarlett criticized the industry. It's that she waited until the industry had already moved on. To many, it felt like watching someone burn a bridge after they've crossed it, and after they've collected the toll from every single car behind them. People weren't buying the narrative of a helpless actress trapped in a system she didn't create. They saw something else entirely, a strategic pivot from someone who could feel the tide turning. Someone trying to reframe their fading stardom as some kind of brave awakening. And that's where the "you can't fire me, I quit" theory comes in. Think about it.
Desirable and something that I was fighting against. Yes, I think you are older now.
Instead of admitting that the roles aren't coming in like they used to, you claim you're walking away on your own terms. You spin it into an act of rebellion, of moral clarity, of growth. It's not that you've been replaced by younger actresses with more buzz, it's that you're done playing that game. See the difference? It's not a fall from grace, it's a transformation. Or at least that's how the PR teams want you to see it. But audiences are savvier now. We've seen the pattern too many times. The aging starlet denounces her past roles. The rebrand begins. Suddenly, she's doing interviews about body positivity, identity, purpose. She's deep, enlightened, ready for her serious era.
And persistence paid off. And today, she's not just a star, she's a symbol of change. What do you think? Is the male gaze truly...
The problem, it's rarely sincere, because sincerity requires risk. It requires you to speak up when it might cost you something. And that's not what this feels like. This feels safe, controlled, market-tested. And let's be honest, if Jurassic World Afterbirth had been a hit, If she were still headlining Marvel films? If the box office were still singing her name? Would she still be talking about objectification? That question hangs in the air, uncomfortable, unanswered. But here's the irony that nobody missed. Scarlett Johansson spent 2 decades as one of the most desired women in the world. She didn't just benefit from the male gaze, she embodied it. She profited from it.
How should I say this? The gift that keeps on giving. Okay.
And now after every red carpet, every perfume campaign, every slow motion movie entrance filmed from the hips up, now she's the one exposing the system. To many, it felt like too little, too late. And from some, it felt like outright gaslighting. Because let's not pretend that Scarlett's fame was purely accidental, or that she was powerless in shaping her image. She had agency, she had choice. And she leaned into the spotlight willingly until it started to dim. And that's what made the public's reaction so visceral. Not the message, but the messenger. The truth is, people aren't angry that Scarlett criticized Hollywood.
For a second. But these are the chicks that were just absolutely running shop all over the college scene, okay? They were driving to the rim. Nobody could
They're
stop
angry
them.
that she waited until after she was done benefiting from it. They're angry that she wants applause for surviving a system she once ruled. And above all, they're angry that once again the conversation isn't about change, it's about her. But Scarlett's not alone in this performance. In fact, this exact act has been playing out across Hollywood for years, and the script is starting to look very familiar. In Hollywood, youth isn't just a phase, it's a product. And once it expires, so do the roles, the headlines, and the illusions. For actresses, that expiration date usually comes stamped with a big invisible number, 40. And right on schedule, something strange starts happening.
Iron Man movie. But she got mad basically in the sense because she hated the male gaze and how every guy wanted to have shit and fantasize it.
The red carpet stunners who once dazzled as femme fatales, superheroes, and seductive sidekicks suddenly begin reinventing themselves. Not with a new movie or performance, but with a message. One that always starts the same way. I'm done being objectified. It's a transformation we've seen countless times. A once hypersexualized actress trades her plunging neckline for a modest blazer and sits down for a reflective interview. She talks about empowerment, ownership, reclaiming her image. She renounces the roles that built her career. She mourns the characters that, according to her, reduced her to nothing more than eye candy.
Our dear, dear Scarlett recently sat down with the Times of London because nothing says, I'm relatable.
And every time the timing is eerily precise, just before or after hitting that dreaded milestone of 40. It's what we now unofficially call the 40s actress syndrome. Scarlett Johansson is simply the latest name added to the list, but she's certainly not the first. Remember Megan Fox? She once made headlines for being too hot for Hollywood. But when the roles dried up and the critics turned on her, she became a vocal critic of the very media machine she once dominated. Or Cameron Diaz, who practically vanished from the spotlight after years of being cast as the bubbly blonde bombshell, only to resurface later, preaching authenticity and inner peace.
Week that despite loving the craft, spending 20 years as an A-lister meant she didn't have a lot of opportunity to make
Charlize Theron went from playing deadly seductresses to saying she was done with the male gaze. Even Angelina Jolie, once the ultimate fantasy figure in films like Tomb Raider and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, shifted her image toward humanitarian work and motherhood, stepping away from roles that had once defined her. Each of these women reinvented themselves, but only after the system stopped choosing them. And that's the part that never gets said out loud. This reckoning doesn't arrive during the rise. It only shows up after the fall. No one renounces the male gaze while it's still paying the bills. And that's what makes these public pivots so hard to believe.
kind of think it might be a radical type of feminism because we have this femininity. It has power.
When someone plays the game for decades, collecting awards, endorsement deals, and lead roles, all thanks to the very system they later criticize, it starts to feel less like honesty and more like insurance. Like a way to soften the landing after the spotlight moves on. Because let's be real, no one in their prime walks away from being adored. They walk away when that adoration fades. And instead of admitting that Hollywood has moved on, they flip the script. Suddenly, it's not about being left behind. It's about choosing to rise above it. It's the you can't dump me, I dump you of the entertainment world. And sure, some of these women might truly be reflecting. Maybe they do feel conflicted about their past roles. Maybe they regret how far they leaned into sex appeal.
See yourself through the eyes of the male camera operator, and you see yourself through the eyes of the male director.
To survive in a brutal, image-obsessed industry. But even then, the question remains, why now? Why only once the roles dried up, the calls slowed down, and the next wave of 25-year-old stars started booking the gigs they used to own? If this awakening was about morality, fairness, or feminism, why not speak out when it could have cost them something? That's the tension behind this so-called syndrome. It's not the message itself that feels manipulative, it's the timing. Because audiences aren't stupid. We've watched these actresses accept role after role that framed them through a lens of desirability. We've seen them embrace photo shoots, magazine spreads, and product deals that sold beauty first and talent second.
And you're only seeing things from a male point of view. And I think that our culture would do better to have more respect for the female perspective.
And we've seen them collect every benefit that came with that image. But now, suddenly, they want to be seen for their minds. Their depth, their authenticity, and the audience response, mostly a shrug, sometimes a groan, and occasionally a laugh. Because it's hard to feel sympathy for someone who voluntarily walked into the castle, lived like royalty, and only started complaining once the kingdom changed rulers. Here's the cold truth. Aging in Hollywood is brutal, especially for women. There are fewer roles, fewer chances, fewer people watching. That's not fair. But pretending it's all about ethics and empowerment, when it's clearly about visibility, feels disingenuous. And deep down, it's not just the roles these women are mourning.
We want to tell stories that reflect our lives back at us. And many, many, many women watch television.
It's
and
the attention, the relevance, the power that comes from being wanted by casting directors, photographers, audiences, and fans. And when that power slips away, they don't just grieve it. They rebrand it. They call it liberation. But to many, it looks a lot like denial, because here's the reality that nobody in Hollywood wants to confront. It's not that the male gaze left them behind. It's that it found someone younger to focus on. And instead of saying, that hurts, they say, I'm better than that now. It's not bravery. It's self-preservation. It's ego management dressed up as empowerment. And if Scarlett's recent comments sound familiar, it's because this is.
1970s Hollywood was a long-established male-driven industry, so you would have male executives who would fund pictures made by
the same old script, just with a new actress delivering the lines. But the camera's not as forgiving anymore, and the audience, they've seen how this movie ends. Here's the plot twist that no one seems to talk about. It's not just women who get boxed in by Hollywood. Men get typecast too, just differently. Less obviously, less tragically, but just as relentlessly. Because while Scarlett Johansson is bemoaning the roles that revolved around her appearance, countless male actors have spent decades stuck playing the same version of themselves over and over again. Not because they wanted to, but because the machine decided that's all they were worth.
Massive, and it's used as like a point of comparison. Chris Hemsworth, shirtless, is for the male gaze. Loki is for the female
Take
gaze.
Hugh Grant, for example. For most of his career, he was trapped in rom-com purgatory. The stammering, awkward, sweater-wearing Englishman. Charming, sure. But creatively suffocating? Absolutely. And only recently, well into his 60s, has he finally started landing the kind of dark, complex roles that allow him to stretch beyond the lovable loser box he was shoved into for 20 years. Then there's Matthew McConaughey, a man who spent the early 2000s shirtless in beach scenes and running through airports to win the girl. The guy was basically typecast as hot Southern guy with a six-pack. Critics laughed at his career until seemingly overnight.
Rarely get to hear from men. What did you think about this?
It's a thing. You know, a lot of people don't. I focus on my body too.
He dropped the abs and embraced the grit. True Detective, Dallas Buyers Club, Mud, these weren't just comeback roles, they were rescue missions. He had to claw his way out of the pretty boy quicksand Hollywood buried him in. And we can't forget the action heroes of the 80s and 90s, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme, Seagal. Their muscles were their identity. Their roles were formulaic. And when time caught up with their physiques, the roles evaporated. Nobody wanted to see a 65-year-old man doing roundhouse kicks in slow motion. So they faded or got recast as parodies of themselves. That was their only path forward, either disappear or lean into self-mockery.
Back fat, but I look at it like, hey, you're just being blunt with me. I'm not an offensive type of person, even though we live in this very offensive society.
Here's the bitter irony. While Scarlett Johansson is talking about being sexualized, men are still being brutalized by the same system, but in silence. We don't call it objectification when it happens to men. We call it branding. We don't talk about their appearance being exploited. We call it expectation. You think those shirtless scenes in Marvel movies just happen naturally? They don't. Those bodies are built under stress, starvation, and science. Hugh Jackman once revealed he needed 6 months of prep to get into shape for Wolverine's shirtless scenes. That's 6 months of brutal training, dehydrated muscles, low body fat.
And it finishes with dehydration. Don't do this at home. It's really, you increase your water intake up to...
No water for 48 hours before the camera rolls, just to look like a comic book panel for 5 seconds. And no one feels sorry for him. There's no female gaze think pieces flooding in. No Instagram campaigns shouting, men aren't props. No national conversations about toxic beauty standards for male actors. Instead, they're expected to man up. Because in Hollywood, if you're a man, the exploitation is called discipline. Want to be taken seriously? You've got to suffer for it. Break out of the mold, reinvent yourself, preferably with an Oscar bait indie flick and a beard. And when you can't escape your box, you fade quietly, no interviews, no outrage, no New York Times feature on aging gracefully.
Dad bod. And those two definitions served two very different ends. The male gaze and the female gaze. So under the...
Just silence? That's the real double standard. Scarlett and her peers get to reframe their careers as emotional journeys, full of growth and self-awareness. But for male actors, there's no room for transformation. You're either castable or you're not, hot or forgotten. And while the world debates whether women are exploited by the gaze, men are still being judged on jawlines, abs, and action scenes, just with fewer complaints and less sympathy. Because, let's face it, no one wants to hear a man say he's tired of being looked at. No one wants to hear an actor admit he hated being the fantasy, that he felt stuck in his own success.
I was like, but what's the female gaze? And that's part of the reason when Florence as Amy sees Timothy for the first time.
That he couldn't show emotion, that he wasn't allowed to age, soften, or stumble. That in many ways he was just as trapped. But the rules are different. Women who criticize the system are seen as brave. Men who do it, they're called ungrateful, or worse, irrelevant. So maybe Scarlett isn't wrong about Hollywood being cruel, but it's not just cruel to women, it's cruel to everyone. And if we're going to talk about objectification, typecasting, and fading stardom, we can't ignore the other half of the conversation. Because this industry doesn't care about anyone's humanity. It doesn't see gender, it sees value.
like, let's shoot it in slow-mo because that's how she sees him. And I was like, I don't know how many times, I mean, you know.
And when that value drops, the story ends. Unless, of course, you write a new one first, which is exactly what Scarlett's trying to do, but she's not the only one, and she won't be the last. For all the talk about the male gaze and now the female gaze and whether Scarlett Johansson was a victim or a beneficiary, maybe we're missing the most obvious point. This was never about gender, this was about beauty, and more specifically, about how we, the audience, respond to it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We like looking at attractive people. Men, women, everyone, it's hardwired, it's primal, it sells. Hollywood didn't invent this obsession, it just...
Male gaze, which as it sounds, explains how women are exhibited or gazed upon by the audience. Movies
packaged it better than anyone else. Why do you think the biggest stars in the world have always been physically appealing? Why do you think red carpets exist? Why do you think superhero suits are skin tight? Lighting is perfectly crafted, and close-ups are edited down to the most flattering frame possible? Because looks sell fantasy, and fantasy is what we pay for. There's a reason we tune into movies, not mirrors. Reality is beer guts, receding hairlines, dark circles, cellulite. But what we see on screen, sculpted abs, glowing skin, eyes that catch the light just right. It's aspirational, it's unattainable.
And female gaze implies a centering of female looks, but also of female stories, of women's lives.
And that's exactly the point. Scarlett Johansson wasn't just famous because she could act. She was famous because she was beautiful, full stop. So were Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Chris Hemsworth, Margot Robbie, Zendaya. The list goes on, and it's not just a male fantasy. That's the lie we keep telling ourselves to keep the discourse neat. Go ask any straight woman if she skipped the gym the day Thor showed up shirtless in Ragnarok. Ask them if they noticed the camera lingering a little longer on Captain America's biceps. They noticed, we all did. Because the gaze isn't a male creation, it's a human impulse. And that's where the double standard starts to unravel.
I now feel 100% back to normal, so that's the key. If you're feeling flat, just get moving. Movement creates motivation.
Scarlett talks about being tired of being seen as desirable. But look at the Marvel films in the last decade. While the female outfits got bulkier, more armored, more modest, the men were still stripping down, still hitting the gym for 6 months just to shoot a 5-second shirtless scene. No one said they were being objectified. No one said it was toxic. No one wrote a New York Times op-ed about how Chris Evans had been reduced to a chest. But here's what we don't see. Behind those perfect abs is a grueling cycle of deprivation. Actors go days without water before those scenes just to look more defined. They live in calorie deficits, work out twice a day, sacrifice social lives.
Everything you do, from your job to maintaining a social life to pursuing your passion projects, you are killing it. Ignore anyone who tells you otherwise, because
push their bodies past healthy limits, all for our gaze. And yet, no one cries exploitation, because men are supposed to want it. Because if you look good, you win. End of story. But that's the trap. We've created a system where beauty is the ticket in, and the curse that follows you out. Scarlett is now tired of being objectified, but is it really objectification when it was once your superpower? When the very thing you're criticizing was the same thing you weaponized to dominate the industry? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the fear of losing what once set you apart. Because here's what no one wants to admit. We treat beauty like currency, and when that currency starts to fade,
the beginning of her Hollywood career, she was told by a casting director she wasn't pretty enough and didn't have it. He interrupted her mid-sentence.
Pretend it never mattered in the first place. But it did. It always did. And it still does. For every actor, every influencer, every celebrity who carefully crops their Instagram photos, adjusts the lighting, perfects the angles. The male gaze, the female gaze, call it what you want. At the end of the day, it's all part of the same system, the human gaze. We reward beauty, we worship it, and we tear people apart when they don't meet our standards anymore. So yes, Scarlett is right. Something has shifted. But it's not the roles, it's the audience. We're not just looking, we're evaluating, not just consuming, but judging. And now for the first time, the people who lived off our gaze are
life. You know, I don't want to spend my life wasting it worrying about how I look or what other people think.
Starting to feel its weight. And what they do next might reveal more about them than any role ever could. Here's where the story takes a turn. From personal reflection to strategic performance. Because when celebrities like Scarlett Johansson start preaching about objectification, gender politics, or empowerment, it rarely happens in a vacuum. It happens with timing, with purpose, and more often than not, with a new movie on the way. Let's not pretend this wasn't calculated. Scarlett's remarks about the male gaze didn't come during an off-season podcast or a low-stakes panel at Sundance. They came during a full-blown press tour for Jurassic World.
Anything to do with Jurassic World, they're all about how hard it is to be a woman in Hollywood. Shocker. And she has
a film already circling the critical drain before it even opened wide. Coincidence? Not likely. In modern Hollywood, activism is marketing. And nothing grabs headlines faster than a celebrity taking a stand, especially when the topic is culturally hot and emotionally charged. And here's the thing, it works. The second Johansson opened up about being objectified, she got press, not just entertainment blogs, but mainstream coverage. Suddenly, she wasn't just promoting a potential box office flop, she was reclaiming her narrative, reframing herself, getting ahead of the inevitable career shift by turning it into a movement.
It has indeed shifted in Hollywood. Your box office draw. Now, this
She's
is the
not
first.
alone. It's become a Hollywood formula. A star fades from the A-list. Cue the TED Talk. Box office numbers start slipping. Time for the emotional Instagram post. Casting rumors die down. Suddenly, they're at a protest, clutching a sign, surrounded by photographers. And sure, some of it may come from genuine conviction. But the rest? It's PR, polished and prepped by image consultants who know how to spin a crisis into a comeback. That's why this kind of activism rarely feels risky. It's never revolutionary. It's safe, on-brand, focus group tested. Scarlett isn't out here torching bridges. She's strategically switching lanes.
Because men might be attracted to it, and that's a bad thing. And in the movie, they don't show it, and it's done tastefully.
Trading one identity for another. The seductress becomes the philosopher. The action star becomes the feminist. The eye candy becomes the intellectual. And the timing, always perfect. We saw the same thing when stars started denouncing the roles that made them famous after the fame had already plateaued, when they called out sexism or racial bias after securing the lead roles, when they demanded equality after cashing the paychecks. And suddenly, every star who once leaned into the system is now trying to stand above it. Not because the system changed, but because they did. Or more accurately, because Hollywood...
She was criticized for her alleged plastic surgery. In 2016, Zellweger wrote an article for HuffPost where she
changed around them. Because let's face it, virtue signaling is the new survival strategy. If you're no longer relevant for your talent or beauty, then you better be relevant for your message. It doesn't even matter if it contradicts everything you built your career on. You can be a brand ambassador for luxury makeup while preaching about inner beauty. You can post filtered bikini pics while condemning body standards. You can spend a decade playing sexy assassins and then accuse the audience of seeing you as a sexy assassin. Because in Hollywood, integrity is optional, but reinvention is mandatory, and Scarlett's reinvention is unfolding in real time.
She was talking about not no one will hire me anymore, but she's like, I'm just so glad that I'm getting offered different...
She's not just selling tickets anymore, she's selling depth, she's pitching awareness, she's auditioning, not for a role, but for relevance in a culture that demands constant social currency. But here's where it starts to fall apart, because when everyone's an activist, no one really stands for anything. The statements blend together, the causes feel hollow, the messages lose meaning. And the audience? They notice. They see the contradiction, the polished captions, the carefully lit videos, the manufactured outrage. They remember the films, the magazine covers, the interviews that painted a very different picture. They don't forget who these stars were before they became enlightened. And that's the real tragedy of Hollywood activism.
I wouldn't be involved with something that I felt was hurtful to people.
When it becomes a costume instead of a conviction. So maybe Scarlett believes every word she's saying. Or maybe she's just saying what needs to be said to stay in the game. Either way, the damage is done. Because once you cry exploitation after years of participation, the audience isn't sure whether to feel inspired or insulted. And in an industry full of actors, sometimes the most convincing performance of all happens off-screen. But Scarlett's not finished yet, because now that the activism arc is underway, there's only one thing left to do: walk away from the gaze entirely, or pretend like it never mattered.
Yeah, that's good on her. I guess enjoy it.
Strip away the headlines, the hashtags, and the performative outrage, and what's left is the one truth no celebrity wants to admit. Fame doesn't last. And when you've built your entire life on being seen, heard, adored, the silence can be deafening. That's what this really is, isn't it? Beneath the feminist theory, the interview quotes, the viral sound bites, what we're witnessing is a very human reaction to something brutal and unrelenting: the slow fade into irrelevance. For decades, Scarlett Johansson wasn't just a movie star, she was the movie star. Her image was everywhere: red carpets, fashion campaigns, late-night interviews.
Guys make millions of dollars on it and then complain about the culture. You can have one or the other. You cannot have both.
She didn't just walk into a room. She entered with that trademark confidence, mystery, and camera-ready glow. People didn't just watch her movies. They watched her. And now the spotlight isn't as bright. Now the scripts aren't written for her anymore. Now the roles go to actresses half her age with newer names, bigger buzz, and social media followings that can move millions overnight. And that's not a crime. It's not sexism. It's not even personal. It's the cycle. The same one that built her is now building someone else. And for stars like Scarlett, that cycle feels cruel because it exposes just how conditional fame really is.
Sexual pleasure from looking at naked bodies. After all, the age-old adage is still true: sex sells. And
Hollywood doesn't love people, it loves products. It doesn't invest in your soul, it rents your image. And when that image starts to shift, even slightly, it moves on without a second glance. And here's the part no one talks about. Fame is addictive. More addictive than money, more intoxicating than praise. It gives you purpose, identity, validation. So when it starts to slip away, it doesn't feel like a chapter closing, it feels like a funeral. Not for your career, for your relevance, for the version of yourself that only existed through the lens of adoration. That's why stars don't go quietly. That's why they pivot, rebrand, post manifestos on Instagram.
And I thought I would do a rebrand. I thought, I'll go and join the circus and become a comedian.
So that was your first rebrand?
Oh yeah, this is my...
Because the worst thing that can happen to a celebrity isn't losing money or missing a role. It's becoming invisible. And in that light, Scarlett's statements about the male gaze don't feel radical. They feel like damage control. A way to make peace with the terrifying realization that the gaze is gone. But here's the paradox. The very thing she claims to resent, the objectification, the attention, the sexualization, was also the thing that gave her everything. It opened doors, it sold tickets, it built a persona that directors, fans, and magazines couldn't get enough of. And now that it's fading, she's rewriting the story.
The problem is the selective outrage. You think Hugh Jackman enjoyed dehydrating himself for 3 days before every
Not because it was all a lie, but because she doesn't know what to do without it. Because what happens when the beauty that once gave you power no longer protects you? When the desirability that once made you untouchable starts to feel like a memory? When the crowd starts cheering for someone else? That's not just career turbulence, that's identity collapse. And maybe that's why we're hearing so much about the male gaze now. Not because it suddenly became unbearable, but because it stopped looking. And what's left in its absence isn't empowerment, it's mourning. Mourning a phase of life, a version of yourself, a reality where you were the center of gravity.
Or desirable, it just feels like a weird fan fiction where you gender swap everybody.
Yes.
It's easy to throw around big words like liberation and transformation. But for many aging stars, this isn't evolution, it's survival. It's a way to stay in the spotlight without admitting you're no longer what the spotlight wants. So when Scarlett says she's done with objectification, maybe what she means is she's making peace with the fact that it's done with her. That's not empowering, that's devastating. But it's also real, and maybe, just maybe, it's the one part of this entire narrative that doesn't feel rehearsed. Because behind the designer interviews and carefully crafted statements is a truth every star eventually faces.
At 37, she was too old to play the lover of a 55-year-old man. The actress says she went from being astonished to feeling...
Fame doesn't care who you are, it only cares who's next. So here we are, Scarlett Johansson, once the face of desire, now the voice of critique. Once praised for her beauty, now praised for rejecting it. Once the product of the system, now pretending to stand apart from it. But the question still lingers, was this a revelation or a rebrand? Because in a town built on illusion, where reinvention is survival and sincerity is often just strategy, it's hard to tell where the acting ends and the authenticity begins. Was Scarlett objectified? Absolutely. Was she complicit? Also, yes. Did she benefit from the gaze she now rejects? More than most ever will, and that's what makes this moment so complicated.
And let's talk about the issue of body shaming.
You're making your body a commodity, and everyone can have a slice of the pie.
She's not wrong to critique the industry. But she's also not innocent in its design. She didn't just play the game, she won it. And now that the crowd has moved on, she's critiquing the rules. Not because they were unfair, but because they no longer work for her. And maybe that's the harshest truth of all, not just for Scarlett, but for all of us watching. Because we helped build this machine. We cheered, we stared, we clicked. We bought the illusion every step of the way. The male gaze, the female gaze, at the end of the day, it's the human gaze, ours. And the moment it shifts, everything changes. Careers, identities, power. It's not about justice, it's about attention. And once it's gone, no amount of introspection can bring it back. So while Scarlett repositions herself as the critic of the very system that built her, the audience moves on, silently, indifferently, toward the next beautiful face, the next fantasy, the next rising star. Because that's how this ends. Not with a bang, not with a scandal, but with a gaze that quietly turns away,